Welcome to another episode of The Part-Time Show. This one's been recorded on the 8th of October 2020. I'm your host, Dr. Kapil Amarasinga, aka Joe Sky on Reddit. You can follow me on Twitter at TheGreatestDoc. Now today I'm going to talk about something that's very special to me, a topic that's been foremost on my mind for a while. I've been really thinking over the last few days about how I wanted to express this idea to you, but ultimately it's a war. A liquidity war. The topic I want to talk to you today, it's one that's been playing out for the last 40 years, but it really accelerated from 2007 and 8. So, what is this? It's called wealth inequality, and there's been a lot that's been talked about. If you look at the stats right now, 47% of global wealth is held by about 1% of the world's population. That is a massive concentration of wealth. And this is a trend that has been concentrating over a period of 40 years. It's been occurring on a background of continuous fiat currency inflation. Bear in mind, from around the sort of early mid-70s was when we moved away from the gold standard. But that's not what this talk is about today. No. This is about the printing of money and the diluting of the masses into the idea that a savings account is a good thing. No, if you look at the facts, if you look at the figures, a savings account is a terrible, terrible thing. You've told the middle classes and the working classes, work hard, save your money, spend it on consumerism. Run up those debts, work hard, clear them, save what you can, get a debt. Right, I get it. It's a pattern. But you see, you stock that money in a bank account and it loses value over time. I can give you an idea of just how much value it's lost over time. From 2007 to the present, $100 bought then would be worth $125 today. That is a 25% decrease in value. That means if you'd stored $10,000 in a bank account, in a savings account, back then, that would be worth $7,500 today. In real world terms, if you account for inflation. It's something most people don't realize because that number, the 10K, it stays the same. But actually, if you look at the inflation calculators in the US dollar particularly, that tells a whole other story. Look back 100 years. $1 100 years ago is worth $0.0008 today. That's right, it's worth less than 0.01 cents. That's a 1,200% depreciation in value. That should tell you just how bad an investment fiat is, just how bad an investment long-term a savings account is against interest. It means nothing. And I'll tell you what, we're screwed. We screwed them over. We screwed this up. From 2007 and 2008, when the world's big banks were all about to collapse in a cascade of dominoes tumbling one after the other, the government stepped in and they intervened and they said, look, we'll give you the money you need to survive. We'll give you the money you need to stay afloat. And we're going to get it through taxing people that are poor, that work hard, the working classes, the middle classes. They are the majority of taxpayers in this country, in the UK and in the US and in Europe. When we tax them, how are we going to afford anything? Because we're out of money giving it to these banks. So not only are we going to tax our working classes and our middle classes, but we're also going to cut access to core public and social services. We're going to stop spending on infrastructure. We're going to turn off the lights. We're going to do whatever it takes. We're going to scrimp and save wherever we can because they're the easiest places to scrimp and save from. Because I don't know about you, but if you've ever come from money or if you've ever had real money, you'll just know how easy it is to perform tax avoidance, not evasion. Really important difference there. Tax evaders generally do get caught. But tax avoiders, the richer you get, the easier it becomes. And that is a whole other topic. So why am I talking about this? Why have I referred to this as the liquidity wars? Well, I want to go back and say 46% of the world's wealth is held by 1% of the global population, and therein lies a problem. There is ongoing wealth concentration into a smaller and smaller group of people. How has this happened? Let me explain it to you in really simple terms. In the simplest terms, it goes back to austerity. It goes back to 07, 08. Part of the way we got out of the banking financial crisis wasn't just bailouts. No, we set interest rates to near zero. We printed off tons of money, and we used that money that we were printing off. The central banks printed off loads of money. The euro, the European Central Bank, the US Fed, the UK central banks, they were printing off so much money. And so much of that money went into the purchasing of bonds and stocks. So we have a dichotomous situation here. Dichotomous in the sense that where one thing is going up, the other thing is going down. So over a 13-year period, while standards of living, whilst real-world wages, whilst real-world standards for the average person over a 13-year period have been in a consistent decline, whilst the value of savings from 2007 have been in a consistent decline, the value of shares has just been going up, up and up. If you look at the S&P 500, if you look at the FTSE, if you look at any major stock exchange and look at a lifetime trend, you just see that it is basically one big continuous line up. Draw a straight line. I dare you to look at a lifetime chart today. I dare you to look at any chart from 07, 08 and then chart it across. That trend in shares has been going up. And I'll tell you why. Because all that money that's been printed off has been buying shares and stocks. That's been helping big companies get richer. It's been allowing this wealth concentration to occur. It's been allowing people who are already invested in shares, who are already educated in shares and stock markets and financial indices and the way the world of finance works. People who have that information, people who are educated, people who typically come from money. Let's be upfront. Your average middle class and working class person doesn't come from that background. They don't have a financial education. So most of them, their exposure to stock markets has been through pension funds. In my opinion, if you are a smart, active trader, it's so easy to beat a pension fund. I've given myself an education that most people haven't, and that's the problem, because wealth continues to concentrate at the top. And this is my next point in the liquidity wars, because that wealth is going to keep on concentrating. We're not done yet. Only 46% of the world's global liquidity is concentrated in 1%. We've not gotten over the 50% standard yet, the 50% mark yet. But I'll tell you how it's going to happen. I'll tell you exactly what's going to become. It's going to be cryptocurrency. If you look at cryptocurrency global world trends, that market is on and up. It's one of the biggest, fastest rising market. Yes, there's a lot of fraud. Yes, there's a lot of corruption. Yes, there's a lot of questions about its intrinsic value. Yes, there are questions about the kind of services and value that it provides. But if you look at the real platforms, if you look at things like Ethereum, if you look at things like Particle, if you look at things like Monero or Bitcoin, Origin Protocol, there are so many. There are so many different chains you can look at. Actually, there's a whole bunch, right? I'm not going to start naming them, but you can look and you can see areas where real value is being created, where real efficiency is being created. And you can see areas where real speculation is occurring, where real liquidity is shifting traditionally from fiat into these markets. It's an undeniable trend. It's not going to go down. But I'm not here to tell you to go invest in cryptocurrency. No, I would actually say don't. If you don't know what you're doing, if you don't understand it, don't touch it. Learn about it. Really know what you're getting into first, because it's a big world. No, that's not my point. My point is this, and my point is really simple. I realized this when I was at the New York Blockchain Week in 2019. That was a year ago. I realized that our next generation of trillionaires was most likely going to come from cryptocurrency. I'm not going to say why. It's too big a topic to talk about. But I realized it there and then. You had this thing called Bitcoin that made an entire generation of millionaires, multimillionaires, and even a handful of billionaires. And if you look at the Winklevoss twins, pretty close to trillionaires. And on that next bull run, those people are going to get wealthier, and more fiat is going to shift into that system. More value is going to keep shifting into that system. But here's the problem. That wealth concentration into a minority is going to continue. And I believe that, right now, if 46% of the wealth in this world is held by 1% of the population, by the end of the next cryptocurrency bull cycle, I think 50% of the world's wealth potentially is going to be held by 0.1% of the world's population. It wouldn't surprise me. Certainly, I think we're going to see a 51% attack on our global economy really soon. And for those who just got it, you know about cryptocurrency. You know that the 51% attack's a dangerous thing. It's something that Bitcoin taught me, which is that when you concentrate a ton of resources into a very small set of hands, they can hijack the majority to the detriment of everybody. And that's the problem when you over-concentrate global liquidity. Now, I want to explain this because this is really the last point that I want to make. And it's a simple one. How many people can you think of at the same time? How many people in an average day do you directly interact with? How many people do you care about? How many people do you directly know? Forget your social media networks. Just focus on your direct friends and your direct day-to-day interactions. How many people do you care about? If it's more than a handful, if it's more than 10 people that you can answer in that space of time, I'm impressed. Now, the reason I say that is because the number of people that you can actively interact with in a day, that you can care about, for most people to see just more than 20 of the same people a day, I think that's not actually a common thing. But this is my point. Even though you may only interact with less than 100 people a day, I think that's true of most people. There are so many people in this world who are actually, whilst they're only interacting with less than 100 people, probably less than 50 people a day, they're responsible for the lives of thousands, of tens of thousands, of hundreds of thousands, of millions. Let's take Jeff Bezos, trillionaire, employs loads of people. Most of them are on minimum wage. Most of them don't exactly have the greatest working standards. Most of them are being spied on. Lots of them are having attempts at union breaking. We have this all documented. There's lots of evidence now that's coming out to show that Jeff Bezos isn't a very nice guy. Here is a man that sits with $1 trillion net worth. I don't know how much is locked away in his personal bank account, but my God, I think it's kind of cheap of a man to be that wealthy and yet insist that the majority of his core workforce is on minimum wage, or not that much over it. To me, that says a lot about a man. That says a lot about a man who's got an addiction to making money, but an addiction to the point of making money and driving up the share prices for his company, that he's lost insight into the true level of personal responsibility that he wields. You see, here's the thing. Empathy is on a spectrum. Some people are more empathetic than others. The more empathetic you are, your concept of self-interest will include more people. The less empathetic you are, your concept of self-interest will have fewer people in it. People with no empathy, their idea of self-interest is them. Solipsism in its purest form. Me and no one else. And people with more empathy, when they talk about self-interest, when I talk about self-interest, I'm going to talk about my friends, my wife, there's a few people. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm the most empathetic person on the planet. I think I'm somewhere in between. But the point is, even with my own blunted sense of empathy compared to some other people, I realize the problem at hand. I'm a pragmatist, and I realize that if I was sitting in Jeff Bezos' shoes, I would feel a massive weight of responsibility, but at the same time I would feel so blind. Because if I had that much money concentrated in my sole possession, how am I supposed to apportion it to make sure that people get the right infrastructure, the right services? How am I supposed to build a truly fundamental economy that encourages creativity and novelty and people to grow and to learn and to explore themselves and to express their own diversity? How am I supposed to encourage that flow of ideas that is essential to keeping a true economy afloat on a fundamental level. Because believe me, I know how you can manipulate stocks and shares to make them go up and up and up in value without increasing the fundamental value of your company. Enron is the best example of this in the world, and look at where they are now. And right now, this is my biggest concern. Following COVID-19, we have printed off so much money, so many trillions of dollars printed off to try and keep everything afloat, to keep everything the way it is. And yet, left, right and center, wherever you go, you can see things shutting down. I just walked down my high street for the last 30 minutes and I was depressed by how many stores, how many bars, how many restaurants, how many places of cultural diversity have just died. And none of this is going to get better if we keep going the way we are. We need a fundamental change. But fundamental change is possible. If you look at the now, in fact, networks such as Particle, e-commerce networks, which utilize distributed ledger technology, they provide the means for capitalism to evolve so that it is more fair, more equitable, so that the participants of an ecosystem have much more say in how it's run, so that governance is better distributed. But you see, when you look at distributed ledger networks, what you've got is ownership of the network through tokenization. Now, those tokens, they don't just serve as a unit of currency. They don't just serve as the primary unit of settlement on that network. They don't just serve as the means of validating the transactions that occur on that network. They don't just serve functional, abstract, mathematical purpose. They serve a purpose in terms of governance. They can be used as voting tokens. They can be used as voting tools. The number of tokens that you hold in proportion to the number of tokens that exist on that network gives you a vote, the weight of which is equal to your proportion of ownership. Now, to me, this is interesting because if you look at e-commerce networks such as Particle, which utilize distributed ledger technology, which utilize a base token, the part token, that part token, it's not just a token of currency where I want to buy your TV for 500 part tokens. But what's interesting is it's not just a currency token, it's a governance token. It gives you a right of vote. It gives you the right to put proposals forward on how the network should be governed, on how the ecosystem should grow. And everyone who uses those tokens, i.e. buyers, i.e. vendors, i.e. anyone who uses the Particle ecosystem, which requires you effectively to use that base token in one way or another, it gives them a say. Now, if you contrast this with traditional share structures like that found in Amazon, and this is how I turn it all back round. When you look at Amazon, the majority of their shares are held by private shareholders. The majority of private shareholders don't actually work for the company. No, they're not really that interested in their user base insofar as they can make money from their user base. That's their primary aim, is to make money. However, with a network like Particle, or indeed with any distributed ledger technology that incorporates e-commerce or governance and integrates these features, you can, as an active participant, effectively have the kind of say that you couldn't at Amazon. Imagine being a vendor or an everyday buyer on Amazon or on eBay or on another e-commerce platform and then just going, I would like to put this proposal forward to the board. Good luck ever reaching the board of executives. Good luck ever getting their attention. No, there's no mechanism for that. Whereas with the decentralized networks, with the distributed ledger networks, it's just so easy to have a little place where proposals can be put up and viewed by all the token holders. And then all the token holders and anyone who isn't a token holder can still view. But anyway, all the token holders can vote and they all get a say. And that means you as a vendor have a say. You as an everyday consumer have more of a say than you would with the traditional systems. And I think that's a really fundamental step forward because it means the employees and the everyday users are now in control. That, to me, represents a better version of capitalism than the one that we've got. It means that there's fairer representation. It means that the fortunes of the users are tied to the success of the network and vice versa. As the network becomes more successful, the users of that network become better off. And this in its own way acts as a liquidity magnet. Now, when you combine that with things like proof of stake, when you combine that with escrow contracts, when you consider that on a relatively low base supply of tokens with a relatively low inflation rate per annum, as more fiat value enters that ecosystem to buy and sell goods online, there's ever diminishing number of available tokens circulating to carry out those functions of value transfer with, because more of those tokens are getting locked into staking and more of them are being actively locked into escrow contracts for periods of time. Therefore, the value of the individual tokens, the fiat value, will go up as the system gains more traction. And as the system gains more traction, the participants in that system acquire more intrinsic wealth, more intrinsic value, because the value of that system is a true reflection of the value flowing into it. And that, in turn, will trigger a positive feedback loop that will encourage greater participation in the system. And with greater participation in the system, you've basically now just got to factor in cross-chain liquidity, cross-chain currency conversion, cross-chain atomic swaps, switching your Monero over to part and back again, switching your Zcoin over to part and back again, switching your Bitcoin over to part and back again, switching your ETH or your DAI or your USDT or you name it and back again. That's creating cross-chain liquidity, and it's creating a liquidity magnet away from our traditional fiat and capital-based systems towards the cryptocurrency system. It's creating a liquidity magnet that could potentially absorb all of the world's wealth, that could create the next generation of trillionaires, but at the same time ensure that wealth is better distributed than what it has been. And that's why I'm optimistic for the future. I think we have a very bright future ahead. I believe decentralized e-commerce is going to be the driver of the next boom. But I also believe it's going to pave the way for better systems of corporate and regional governance. And I believe it is going to allow for better participation for all users that engage with that system. And it's going to allow every user to have a better voice, a more audible voice, a clearer voice. It's going to allow for a greater level of expression. It's going to allow for a greater free flow of ideas. Why? Because at its core, when you respect privacy, you are respecting the free flow of information. And when you're respecting the free flow of information, you are encouraging the generation of novelty. And when you encourage the generation of novelty and creativity, you are generating value. And when you generate value that you can trade freely, you are generating an economy.